This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Show. Thanks for joining me. The topic of today's show is emotional intelligence, and I am joined by Patricia Bergstrom.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Sunday Lunch Show, everyone. I'm Graham Stanley, speaking to you live from Mexico City. And on today's show, I'll be discussing emotional intelligence with my special guest, Patricia Bergstrom. Patricia is a dedicated educator with over 25 years of experience. She's passionate about collaborative learning and intercultural understanding. Her professional journey reflects a commitment to empowering educators and students through innovative approaches to teaching. As a project officer with the UN SDSN Global Schools Programme and a board member of the Global Teachers Club, she works to train teachers worldwide in sustainable development and educational empowerment. Currently teaching at the British School of Gran Canaria, Patricia brings expertise in Spanish, English, drama, and student well-being, complemented by advanced training in neuro-language coaching, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and NLP. And I will be talking to Patricia about emotional intelligence and more after the Teachers Talk Radio news.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalized timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
Hey education changemakers, ready for something special? It's Bet Show's 40th anniversary and we're throwing a free celebration just for you. Join us at London Excel from January 22nd to 24th to connect, learn and be inspired. Picture this, 300 plus speakers who truly get it, 600 cutting-edge edtech companies, and all the fresh ideas you need to make 2025 your best year yet. So why wait? Head to uk.betshow.com, grab your free ticket and come celebrate with your peers. Because this is for you. See you at Bet.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week covered a story about a software glitch which wiped Ofsted inspectors' evidence during almost 200 inspections over a 3-year period. The glitch only resulted in revisits on 4 occasions. The report, shared with Schools Week by Ofsted themselves, found that of 26,431 inspections conducted using electronic evidence gathering between February 2021 and May 2024, there were 191 where inspectors reported evidence was lost. Whilst Ofsted say that 4 incidents resulted in inspectors returning to gather extra evidence, it was confident that the judgment is secure in the other 187 cases. Ofsted has refused to name the establishments affected. The electronic system replaced pen and paper in 2019, as the inspectorate said it would better review and synthesise notes and improve security. Schools Week revealed last year that the system was presenting issues, and Chief Inspector Sir Martin Oliver commissioned a rapid review. Ofsted policy states that where the electronic system fails to record and save evidence, inspectors should recapture the salient points from memory as soon as possible after they detect that any notes are missing. The review found that in 182 of the 191 cases, the inspectors affected had followed this policy. In the 5 cases where this was not done, other notes recorded by the inspector or colleagues in the inspection team supported the judgment. Critics, however, have told Schools Week that this isn't good enough. The watchdog has since confirmed it is in the process of moving the electronic system to a new version, which offers improved offline capability and is expected to perform well with intermittent and low connectivity. The BBC covers plans by government to reintroduce a piece of legislation aimed at protecting free speech on university campuses. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which proposed fines for universities failing to uphold freedom of speech, was passed in 2023. Its implementation was stopped after Labour's election in the summer. This was due to concerns that the law was potentially damaging to student welfare. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson told Parliament that the government would be progressing with the legislation, but with significant changes. Phillipson said academic freedom was much more important than the wishes of some students not to be offended. However, the government says it will seek to remove the part of the Act that allows people to sue universities that fail to uphold their duty to protect freedom of speech. The National Union of Students welcomed the announcement, saying the threat of complex legal responsibilities was no longer hanging over them. Further comments can be found on the BBC website. The Guardian features a story about curriculum changes proposed in Italy. Bible reading, Latin learning, and learning poetry off by heart could all return to primary and middle schools as part of a revamp, but this has been criticised as retrograde and nostalgic. Education Minister Giuseppe Valditara gave an interview to an Italian newspaper, Il Giornale, saying that children must discover a love of reading and learn to write better. Another member of the Education Department told a news agency that Christianity's sacred text would be present in some form. According to reports in the Italian press, reading lists could also include books by a variety of 19th and 20th century Italian poets and writers, although space would be made for other writers from across the globe. Political opponents have criticised the proposals as supporting right-wing ideology and confusing authoritarianism with authority. Students have also protested against the proposals, calling them repressive. Finally, pupils at a school in Solihull are being offered the chance to not have homework for 2 weeks, but only if they use their smartphones less and read a book instead. The BBC Radio West Midlands newsfeed says that staff at an independent primary and secondary school have welcomed the scheme aimed to help pupils start the new year with less screen time. Pupils said they were enjoying the change, whilst the head teacher hoped the initiative was about bringing balance between screen time and homework. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Welcome back, everyone, and I am very happy to have with me my special guest, Patricia Bergstrom. Patricia, how are you today, and what have you been up to so far?
Hello, Graham. I'm so honored to be on your show. Here in the Canary Islands, it's midday, so on a nice, lovely Sunday, of course, as a teacher, I've been having a little bit of me time and also marking essays.
Wonderful. Well, wonderful to have the me time. The marking of the essays is a necessity of anyone who is a teacher, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. And we need a lot of emotional intelligence to sort that out.
Yes, definitely. And I'm looking forward to exploring that subject in more detail with you later. But as is my custom, Patricia, I'd love to explore now how you became a teacher, how you became interested in education. Was it that you always wanted to be a teacher, or was it something you fell into by accident?
Well, actually, it was probably the furthest away from what I wanted when I was younger.
Oh, really?
Because yeah, it was. I went to St Andrews and I studied modern languages, but not with the intention to become a teacher. And when I actually finished my degree, I sort of said, "Oh, I'm never going to be a translator, never going to be a teacher." And then, of course, teaching found me. So some years later, I accidentally happened to run into a master's in teaching English as a foreign language. And I'd already been helping out teaching now and again, and realized that actually it wasn't such a bad deal. And to be honest, the students were actually really happy with how they were getting, treated, and explanations and things. So suddenly this new alley opened up for me. And from then I went really backwards because I started off in teacher training.
Oh, wow. And so what was it about translation and teaching at the beginning that put you off?
I don't think there was anything that really put me off. Obviously, having done my degree in the early 90s, grammar translation was a big thing in language learning. So, after years of translating, it was one of these things that you said, no, I'm not motivated by this. I'm never going to do this again. Luckily, methodology has gone forwards and we're no longer stuck in that. So, yeah, it wasn't really so much I don't want to do this because I didn't like it. It was just not really on my horizon. I was more thinking, I thought I was going to go more into sort of psychology, or maybe I was very interested in international law at the time, but we weren't able to do that at undergraduate at that time. You had to sort of go through the national law first and then go into international law. So, yeah, so luckily, I suppose, I couldn't do what I thought I was going to do. And I ended up falling into education, and very happily so.
Wow, interesting. And you said you kind of went through teacher training first. I didn't understand. When you trained to be a teacher, you then started to be a teacher trainer. Is that right? Before you actually taught, or at the same time? What was
Yes,
it?
well, obviously at the same time, but yes, when I finished the master's program, they actually recruited me on it. So I started off really supervising thesis at master's level, and helping teachers become better teachers. But obviously at the same time, I was also teaching. So not in a classroom though, which is why I actually left teacher training 6 years later, because I felt it was really bizarre to be teaching people what to do in an environment that I didn't really have that much experience in. So I left teacher training at that level to pop back into the classroom and really try out some of my own hypotheses there.
Okay. And what age of children or students did you teach when you move into the classroom?
Well, I've always been in a school environment. I've always been teaching teenagers, basically secondary and sixth form. So yeah, so that's the ages that I've been teaching in school environments. But then I also ran my own business for 10 years, and in that language school we had students from initially the age of 5, because I really didn't feel it. I had the tools to take on younger students, but then when my team of teachers sort of increased as well, we took on students that were younger than that. But I've always been more in the secondary and sort of sixth form area.
So what is it about teenagers that appeals to you when it comes to teaching?
That's a really good question. Well, for those of you who know Spanish, I always say that my area of expertise are my adolescentes chungos, which basically means my, the really difficult teenagers. And funnily enough, I've always got on very well with them. I imagine it's because I've always been a very good listener, and my emotional sort of, surveyor equipment is always been very well tuned. So I imagine that they perhaps felt listened to, and that was my way into getting them to feel that there was an empathic listener somewhere.
Right, interesting. Yes, they're definitely a challenge often, aren't they, teenagers to teach?
Very much so, very much so. And I think now in today's society, even more so.
Yes. Well, why do you think it's more challenging now than it was?
Well, I think society has changed a lot, and the input that everyone has right now, it comes from so many different areas. That's not just the family and the school anymore. So there's also been a shift in how people view authority and how you view sort of role models. I think children of today have a lot. They have their voice, they have their voices, and they should have their voices, of course. Sometimes, however, I think some people might have sort of confused giving people voice with permissivity. So sometimes children sort of grow up not really having any boundaries and not really knowing when, where, and how. And they need the guidance in these things, you know, to be able to develop into functional adults as well. So it's not a matter of sort of being authoritative or authoritarian, but we need to sort of balance the providing a space for voice and decision making with a guidance. And that might not always be on the same page.
Yes, I think that rings true for me as well. That's interesting to hear you say that, though. Definitely. So moving on to emotional intelligence, I'd love to hear from you what it is about emotional intelligence that attracted you, and how you became involved in exploring this in education.
Well, I think every era in your life has, needs different tools. And I must confess that I've been quite reactive in my life. So, and this was good at some points in my life to be a reactive person in the sense of like, not being trampled on and whatever. However, as you sort of grow up a bit more and you get more mature, I suppose, you realize that reactivity is not really a very good way to go. So I started exploring how to be less reactive. First of all, I actually got into mindfulness. And through mindfulness, I realized the power of mindfulness, both informal and formal practice, in changing the way that you can react to what's going on around you and to realize, what is in your hands and what isn't in your hands. And through that, I started exploring emotional intelligence. I think there's a sort of a quote really by Viktor Frankl that really sums up what my journey has been, which is the very famous quote of between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And what I did was basically realize that there was a space. So I could choose that response rather than just being hijacked by my own emotions and being, galloped away with whatever reaction I was having at the time.
Right, interesting. And just to kind of make it clear, would you like to have a go at defining or explaining what emotional intelligence is? And because you mentioned it as well, what mindfulness is for those listeners out there who may not be so aware of it.
Absolutely. Well, mindfulness, if we start from there, is basically to make a very huge area nice and concise and digestible. It's basically relearning how to be in the present moment without judging what's going on. Emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive, use, and understand, manage, and handle your emotions. So it really involves like recognizing and managing your own emotions, but also understanding and influencing the emotions of others. So I imagine you can see how these two can go hand in hand, because you can't really understand other people's emotions without being in the present moment. You can't understand people's emotions in the future. You can't sort of do anything about people's emotions in the past. So you need to sort of be anchored in a more present state to be able to fully understand your own emotions and others' emotions. So I don't know if that sort of helps understand a little bit the two areas.
Yes, definitely. That is a really good, and I'm happy to hear the kind of link, of course, because I guess in order to be mindful, you also need to be in control of your emotions. You can't let your emotions take you away from the present moment as well. Would that be the case?
Yes, absolutely. By becoming more and more mindful, you're more in tune with what's going on in your body and with yourself. So that will help you as well to know, where this space is between the stimulus and response. So they do go very much hand in hand. In fact, a lot of people might feel that, mindfulness is a buzzword and that it's just a fashion. Well, it's been along for a very long time. So what's happened is that from like the 60s, more or less, it became more mainstream thanks to the work of John Kabat-Zinn, who sort of made it a little bit more detached from spirituality, perhaps, and more usable. And that's probably the area that appeals to most people who might not want to go into like the more religious origins of mindfulness. In relation to emotional intelligence, of course, we've got to learn to sort of stay in the present moment through maybe formal practices like meditations. And while we're doing that, one very, very simple practice that has a lot to do with what I said before about the quote from Viktor Frankl is actually trying to realize where the pause is between your in-breath and your out-breath. So as you breathe in and as you breathe out, there's actually a very, very tiny pause before you do the next one. And this is like a microcosm of what you do consciously in emotional intelligence as well. So both of them, if you consciously focus on where you are, your breath, for example, and you consciously realize what your emotional reactions are, then you're going to have a lot more, you're going to have more in your hands how you react to that.
Oh, interesting. And in what ways do you think exploring mindfulness and emotional intelligence is very useful for the teacher as far as teaching is concerned, or as far as how they are with their students?
Well, I think it's actually vital that we explore these in teacher training and in teaching. And in fact, now that well-being has become something important as well for any profession, really, but in particular in teaching, I think because of the high level of stress that we have and the high level of burnout, through a knowledge of mindfulness and emotional intelligence, you can regulate your emotions better and sort of prevent stress and burnout to take over. It develops self-awareness, which obviously is really important for you to be able to manage yourself in any situation. In the classroom, for example, you've got classroom management is very much influenced by the teacher's emotional intelligence. If you have a teacher who's very reactive and very prone to take on the emotional climate of the classroom, you're going to have a very chaotic classroom. Whereas if you have an emotionally intelligent teacher who's able to regulate the classroom management and the behavior in the classroom also through his or her own non-verbal body language, tone of voice, breathing, then that's going to be a great ally for that teacher. So I think there's like various areas of applicability really that you can apply emotional intelligence and mindfulness. One is the teacher themselves on their own self development and self-awareness, so that they can come into the classroom feeling much more confident and in charge of the situation they have, and also be able to regulate quickly or quicker when stress situations occur. Because obviously we're never going to be able to get rid of stress and situations that are complicated. And in particular with teenagers, behavior management is a big aspect that influences well-being and teacher well-being. So it's another tool in your toolbox that helps you regulate quicker and maybe not take things as personally and not and makes you sort of be able to react in a different way and reflect on what happened rather than just let yourself go with the emotions that come in. So the teacher obviously is a big thing in incorporating the emotional intelligence and mindfulness in their own practice as a person and in their job, but they can also use this to regulate their students. In fact, schools that have incorporated mindfulness, for example, practice from an early age, they see a decrease, a big decrease in classroom management problems and in behavior issues, because kids as well, they start regulating in a much better way. I mean, we have to teach, our students as well how to do this. They don't know how to regulate themselves. If I'd known when I was younger how to regulate my emotions, I have a feeling that, my life would have been completely different. I would probably not have got into some of the situations I did get into, thanks to my reactivity at some points. So there's areas in the classroom that's very, very applicable. It's the basis for a focused classroom. It's a basis for a confident teacher. And it's also the basis for leadership and for objective decisions. So there's a lot of applicability of these aspects in teaching.
Wonderful. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So to all of the teachers out there listening to you now, how would you suggest they get started if emotional intelligence and mindfulness isn't something that they've really explored seriously before? Where would be the starting point? Do you need someone to guide you, to help you, or is it something that a teacher can learn for themselves how to do?
I think you can, unless you have like a serious issue with maybe anger management and things like this, then it's something that you can probably work on first by yourself. One tool that's a practical tool that's very powerful, and I find it's something that I definitely recommend that people use, especially the teachers I've been working with as well, and the people in like high stress jobs that I've been working with. This tool is like the first thing that I would always recommend, which is basically keeping an emotional journal. An emotional journal for 10 days where you sort of jot down maybe 3 things each day, that what emotion you felt for it, what happened inside you, what did you say, what was the, so you have like different parameters that you jot down. And then after 10 days of jotting down 3 of these every day, you usually see patterns. And you might be surprised because you might think that your week or your 10 days have been really bad. But then when you look back over your journal, you see that, oh, actually, I spend more time being happy than than angry or whatever. So it's an eye opener. If anybody wants to find out more about it, maybe I could, get the more detailed information to you, and we can maybe get it out there somehow. But it's a very powerful thing to, first of all, take a step back and just observe your own emotions and see how you react in what situations, because that's what's going to give you the information about what type of situations make you reactive and how you react usually in those situations. And that's the first step in realizing, what can I do about it? So if something is always happening, for example, if you when you get feedback on something that you've done, and you always find that you're reacting in a very angry way, or you're not very open to this feedback, maybe you can take a step back and sort of think, okay, what is it that makes me react like this? What can I do instead? How could I do this in a different way? So that's one way. Another very important and useful tool that teachers can do, and anyone really, is to imagine that you're sitting in a cinema or in a theater, and you're sitting there having a look at the film, but the film that's in front of you is your own life, your own situation, the situation that you just had, whatever, but you now have the control in your hand. So you have the ability to stop, pause, go back, go forwards, and sort of assess what happened in that situation, and then you can change what happened in that situation and see how you could perhaps have reacted in a different way. Let's say that you had a really complicated lesson and you had a typical adverse learner who really does not care about detentions or any other disciplinary thing, and it ended up becoming a complete chaos, and you ended up storming out with tears in your eyes. Well, you might want to sit down and sort of review this on the screen, stop it, rewind, have a look at what you could have done instead. How could you have responded to get the whole situation to be in a different way? And in that way, you're sort of reassessing as well what reactions you could have had. So that's something that teachers could do on their own as well. There's some really simple tools out there.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
Hey education changemakers, ready for something special? It's Pet Show's 40th anniversary and we're throwing a free celebration just for you. Join us at London Excel from January 22nd to 24th to connect, learn and be inspired. Picture this, 300 plus speakers who truly get it, 600 cutting-edge edtech companies and all the fresh ideas you need to make 2025 your best year yet. So why wait? Head to uk.betshow.com, grab your free ticket and come celebrate with your peers. Because this is for you. See you at Bet.
I think one of the big areas where teachers are very affected is by their own internal critic. So learning how to realize when your critic is telling you things and how to make the critic become your guide. That's an area as well that can be explored on your own as well. You might need some guidelines just about how to do it, but there are quite a lot of tools that teachers can use to start off their journey.
That's really interesting. I like the idea of the reflective journal as well. Is this something that you mentioned that do it for 7 days or 10 days, etc. But is this something that teachers can benefit from doing over a more longer period of time, do you think?
Yes, initially though, if you're not really very aware of how where you're reacting and you want to get a glimpse on your patterns, it's usually enough to have like a 10-day initial journaling of emotional reactions. But then you can have an emotional journal, obviously, is something that's very beneficial to continue having always. It's a bit like a gratitude journal as well. If you start off your day by jotting down, what you're grateful for, and at the same time, you can also jot down how you're feeling or what your emotional internal weather is, then that would be very beneficial as well, because you get more of an insight into how you react in different situations and how you feel at different times of the day. What's important here is that we don't sort of just put everything in the same bag. We have to sort of realize that you're not the same in the morning as you are in the afternoon, as you are on a Sunday, as you are on a Wednesday. So it's important perhaps to find out which times of the day, which days of the week, which moments of the year you have a tendency to be more prone to reactivity or to be more prone to a certain emotion. And if that has to do with the time or if it has to do with the place you're in. And then from there, take it from there. So definitely journaling is a great tool for a lot of things.
Of course, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess after doing it for a while, you start doing it for a while, writing it down and then reflecting on it, looking back at it, you start to understand a lot better. So it becomes something that you're more aware of. So it's raising awareness, isn't it, of your emotional state in certain days, times, situations, places, etc.
Absolutely. Self-awareness is probably the key to a lot of things. And definitely it's the key to emotional intelligence and emotional management. Because, of course, you can have emotional intelligence already from the start. Some people are very emotionally intelligent, but even though there's been like a debate whether it can be learned or not, it definitely can be learned, in my opinion. You have a lot of tools that can help you become more emotionally intelligent, and it all goes also through the management of your emotions. So you're managing your emotions in an intelligent way. And that's what helps you. One thing I really want to say, though, Graham, is quite often when you're talking about these things, when you go to workshops and whatever, I've heard a lot of teachers sort of come out saying, okay, yeah, that's all very well, but I don't have the time, I don't have the whatever, it's all, very complicated. Well, to be honest, that misconception is probably one of the things that keep us from using it. So if you do want to have more of a self-awareness and you do want to go into mindfulness, in fact, you only need a minute or two, and I think all of us, we do have a minute or two. So you can start off with really tiny, tiny, tiny micro activities and micro steps to get your brain to rewire into new habits. So neuroscience obviously plays a lot, plays a great role in understanding why mindfulness is important and why emotional intelligence is important nowadays. I mean, before, years ago, before neuroscience, obviously, we just had to guess, but now you have scientific evidence for what goes on in the brain.
Yes, that rings true as well. And so if I wanted you to explain or give an idea or an example of a micro activity to help with mindfulness, what would you say?
Okay. A micro activity that is very useful is, for a minute, just stop. Concentrate on your breathing. Just see where your air is coming in through your nose, where your air is going out through your nose, usually in mindfulness, but if you're doing yoga or whatever, it usually be through your mouth. And get your consciousness to sort of concentrate on your points of contact, just where your feet are on the ground, where your back is maybe towards the chair, where your hands are maybe on the table. Take a deep breath, and you've just done a micro meditation.
Right, and that kind of activity will help with calming someone down as well, and maybe taking them away from the stress and taking them away from worrying or whatever is on their mind. And that's the whole point, isn't it?
Absolutely. Doing a micro meditation like this would be to really make your anxiety cycle stop. So by doing that, you're anchoring yourself in the here and now. And if we realize in the here and now, in the exact here and now, we actually don't have any problems at all at this precise moment.
Yeah.
We have things in the future, in the past, but we don't have anything at this precise moment. So by taking the contact points, this is something that's used a lot in trauma, in work with people who have trauma and who might not take very well to breathing exercises. If you focus on your points of contact, you're forcing yourself, your brain, to concentrate on the here and now. So that's a way to anchor you in the here and now. You can then join that with different types of breathing techniques or different types of activities like maybe you've heard of, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 activity, where you look for maybe 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 1 thing that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. Sorry, 2 things you can smell and 1 thing you can taste. And that will also bring you back and calm your limbic system, so you avoid an emotional hijack.
What do you mean by emotional hijack?
Okay, our brain has a tendency to be very reactive because, of course, through evolution, we've had to develop ways to stay away from danger and to keep ourselves safe. This is what's made us really get up to the 21st century. However, society has changed around us, but our brain is basically the same. So we've got, without going very deep into neuroscience here, the brain that we have in common with all mammals is basically the limbic system, the emotional brain. So in having that, we need to sort of make sure that our more human brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, and the more reflective and sort of rational brain, doesn't blow its top.
Mm-hmm.
So by doing different exercises where you sort of keep the rational brain there, we can manage to keep the emotional brain a little bit more in its place, and realize that, I don't have to run away from a tiger or something right now, because I'm actually quite safe in my house. I do have a lot of stress, but the stress is not going to eat me. So by understanding a little bit how your brain works, that actually gives you another tool to help you face different situations. And if we know that the brain has a tendency to always look for the negatives, we then consciously can do something to look for the positives. And by incorporating mindfulness practice and an awareness of how our emotions make us react, we can then refocus what's going on in our brain. So an emotional hijack would be where you literally blow your top, where literally the rational brain just goes out the window, and your emotions, they take you on a ride. I think all of us have experienced situations where we don't think straight, we can't really do anything properly. We go into flight or fight, or we just freeze. So this is the famous sort of reaction that the brain has in front of a situation where it feels in danger. So as rational human beings, which we try to be, not always manage to, but we try to be, we can make sure that we consciously apply different techniques to try and make sure that our top stays on, and that we don't let those emotions hijack us and go off and make us have just the reactivity. So we rather, put in that little pause I talked about at the beginning, and we decide, okay, am I really going to be eaten up by my pile of essays? Probably not. So, maybe I can go for a walk in nature, calm down a little bit, come back and see things in a different light, instead of going into a complete panic attack and not being able to make any decisions, and you basically become very useless when you go into an emotional hijack. I don't know if that made sense.
Yes, it made a lot of sense, and very good advice as well, I think. And that idea of not letting the emotions overwhelm you if something is stressing you out or upsetting you, etc., and then being able to kind of get a handle on it, and then taking a little break, distracting that part of your brain that is kind of overwhelming you, I guess, by a walk or focusing on something else, the breathing, etc. The other things that you were talking about makes a lot of sense. And then trying to think rationally, because it's only really through thinking carefully and rationally without letting the emotions interfere that you'll be able to think about how to tackle the problems. Would that be a reasonable response, you think?
More than distracting, actually, I would say accepting, because it's a funny thing, this. If you distract your brain, or you sort of do something to just not think about something, it sort of tends to come back. However,
Right.
if you sort of accept that, okay, I'm not feeling very happy right now, I'm really angry with the situation,
Yeah.
and you then accept that this is what you're feeling, you might want to label the emotion. And by doing that, you're rationalizing a little bit, and you're calming down your brain, and you're allowing that pause to come in, so that you can then make a choice of how you're going to react towards it. There's a really, really powerful thing that people can do, and I've done this for a long time. I suffer chronic pain. Okay, so it's one of these things that aren't that difficult to disconnect from your brain, and by simply, and I'm saying simply here, without wanting to make this sound as if it's a really simple thing. It's not. But if you think about, if you sort of, you accept that you have this pain, or you accept the situation, the emotion, and you imagine and visualize that you have a little chair beside you. This is something that I do. So I'm just giving you a little bit of my own toolbox here. Imagine that you have a little chair beside you, one of those tiny little, chairs, and you invite whatever is causing you the anxiety, in my case, chronic pain, to sit on this chair. I'm not pushing you away. I'm not putting you under the carpet. I'm not, locking you up. I'm sort of inviting you to sit on this chair beside me in a parallel. By doing that, funnily enough, your brain calms down because you're not fighting the situation. So since you're not fighting the situation, you're not putting the focus on that situation. And that makes your brain realize that, okay, so a threat is not something important. I don't have to put my focus on it. And it then relaxes the focus on that aspect. So accepting something can be very powerful. I know a lot of people think, well, yeah, sure, I can't accept blah, 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 It's true. Yeah, it is difficult sometimes, but if you do try to just accept, by accepting is not meaning, that doesn't mean that you agree with it. It doesn't mean that you like it. All you're doing is you're accepting that it's there. So if you have, for example, a disruptive student in class, and you're always running into this student, and you're always running into, you're hitting your head on the wall all the time, you need to sort of, if you accept that, okay, here we have a situation, little whoever is always answering back and is always giving me a lot of headaches, okay? Then your brain, by accepting that this is a situation, your brain will calm down a little bit and provide you with the space to be able to maybe find a solution. While you're completely concentrating on the problem, you won't find any solutions. So that's a very important thing, that we don't sort of distract or lock away or avoid, but rather accept that this is the situation. And once we do that, then our brain will sort of calm down the focus, and we can then think a little bit straighter.
That sounds really, really good, actually. A really good way of dealing with it. And it's interesting you say it's important not to visualize or to think that you're actually trying to avoid something, make it go away, because it isn't something usually that will go away just by distracting yourself, which is interesting. But the idea of sitting the problem down on a chair next to you, I think it makes a lot of sense to me, actually. And then recognizing that it's there, that you're accepting it, that you're not trying to ignore it. But that's the first stage, I guess, in trying to then deal with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Because if we don't sort of get a little bit of space between ourselves and the situation, then the rational brain won't be able to do its thing, because we've gone into a completely emotional state. So actually, if I may, there's a really good model that helps people as well to keep their brains sort of a little bit calmer in different situations, and it's very good for emotional regulation. And that's David Rock's SCARF model. I don't know if you know about it.
I don't. I'd love to hear more.
Okay, David Rock is somebody who's coined the name neuroleadership, and he's also founded the Neuroleadership Institute. He created a model called SCARF that goes into how status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness affect you. Basically, he works on the basis of, your brain is going to either be in a towards response, or in an away response. So by making this, again, a very huge area into something more digestible, by being aware of how, for example, status affects you. Status can be, your perceived impression of somebody else being above or below you.
Yeah.
So by being aware of how that is affecting you, you can also regulate your emotions better. For example, to take this little model and just translate it into a classroom situation. Years ago, I was teaching groups of staff from hotels, and in the same group, you might have the general manager, the maintenance department, the housekeeping department, the food and beverage. Yeah? So you can imagine that in that room, you had a lot of different roles. And in a place like Spain, where hierarchy is quite prominent in organizations, obviously, being in the same room as your general manager and in a vulnerable situation where you're going to be learning a new language can be complicated. So by being aware of, as a teacher, by being aware of how status can affect my learners, I can then work with how to regulate their emotional situations by organizing situations where they feel safe. So emotional intelligence is very important to create a safe environment. Another one of the SCARF, the acronyms sort of areas is certainty. We're not very good at reading the future. So the more certainty we can have, the calmer we are. We can see that right now. No, I mean we live in a very uncertain world right now. We don't know what's going to go on. We've got climate crisis. We've got lots of global issues. We've got the politics, wars going on. So there's a lot of uncertainty going on, and we don't really take well to uncertainty. So if we can give a little bit more certainty to, for example, our students or our co-workers, then that's going to help their emotional management as well. So, for example, an idea is if you need to see someone, for example, in your office, let's say that you have a coordinating position and you want to see someone in your office and you say, okay, I want to see you at 5 o'clock. Now that's going to set your brain on fire. And the person is going to go, what did I do? What happened? Did I do something wrong? What's going to happen? However, see how the brain changes if I say, oh, can I see you at 5 to discuss that project you sent me the other day? Immediately, we've changed the way your brain reacts. And that helps you as well. So you can manage other people's emotional situations by working with these parameters. Yeah? So you're giving them a little bit more certainty. For your students, for example, instead of just saying, we're going to have a test on Unit 2. That's going to get them all, when, how, where? Instead of saying, okay, we're going to have a test on Thursday, and we're going to be looking at everything that we looked at in Unit 2. Then you're giving them a lot more peace of mind. Autonomy is another one that really plays into teaching, because as nowadays a lot of teachers know, if we give people a perceived choice, we're also giving them more autonomy, even if you've made up the choice beforehand. If you sort of say, okay, we're going to be doing this reading comprehension, this listening comprehension, and this essay. Now, in what order would you like to do them? And they choose the order, chances are that they're going to be much more cooperative because they felt that they had autonomy in the choice. You've already made the decision for them, really, because you're going to do all three things anyway. But by giving them the perceived autonomy, you're making their brains feel safer and a little bit more in control. So that's another one of the SCARF. That's the A in the SCARF. The C in the SCARF. No, the A. Back to me. my brain's going limbic now. And then finally, we've got the relatedness and the fairness. So the relatedness, the R in SCARF, would be whether the people around you perceive them as friends or enemies. So if you want to create a safe environment in your classroom, you need to create an environment where everyone is perceived as a friend for your brain and not as an enemy. So, cut out the laughing at people, being very, understanding with people who might not like reading aloud, empathy, and all these things will help you. And finally, fairness. Obviously, this is the big one in school. No, everyone is, you're unfair. You're giving me an unfair mark. You're treating me unfairly. So, keeping in mind what the perceived fairness does to your brain, then you can manage that as well in the classroom. So it's a very good model to keep in mind for communication with colleagues in any situation, really. But I've applied it in school situations and in the classroom very effectively over the years. So once I got to know about this model when I was training as a new language coach, it's been one of the big pillars of my classroom management and also my lesson planning, really, in a way.
Yes, that's really, it sounds like a very useful acronym, very useful tool. I'm sure people getting to know more about that will help them. To go back to one of the situations you mentioned that you've actually found yourself in, where you have people, I think you said, in a hotel together that have a different status, I think was really interesting. I'd like to hear a bit more about what you actually did. So the idea of, I think the first step is to understand as a teacher that these people will feel, I don't know, vulnerable, threatened, not in a safe place, because you have, for example, people of different, who have a different status together in the same classroom. So the manager or supervisor, along with people they're supervising. I guess there's several things to think about there. One of them is that the people who have who work for their manager, for example, will feel vulnerable, and that they won't want to be exposed, if you like, as not being good at a particular at a language, for example, in the language learning situation in front of their manager. But I guess the other side of the coin is that manager won't want to kind of expose any weaknesses with the people that they manage as well. So how do you deal with that kind of situation, apart from recognizing it's there and that it's going to affect the dynamics of the class?
That's another very good question.
A difficult question, I'm guessing, but it's one I'd love to hear your opinion on.
Absolutely. And it's actually one I really like to dwell into, because it is a situation that happens very often. When you have a very marked difference in status, like, for example, a manager with, employees, it's relatively easy to know that there is going to be a conflict. But sometimes you can have more subtle changes in status. However, if we focus on the ones that you can sort of see that there will be a situation here, because as you rightly said, the manager will feel very self-conscious about being vulnerable in front of the employees, especially if it's a very authoritarian manager. So what I've done in the past is I put a lot of emphasis on a safe space, and first of all acknowledge that everyone in that room is an expert in their field. So you have to sort of acknowledge, first of all, that people do have their talents, and they don't come in as empty vessels, as, teaching and learning used to think centuries ago, or not so long ago, perhaps. So they all come in with their knowledge. So first of all, acknowledge that each and everyone is an expert in their field, and that now we are in the same boat learning this new language. So we all sort of have to leave our manager hat, our coordinator hat, our maintenance person hat as we come into the room. I use sometimes a little story to help with this. That's taken from neurolinguistic programming, where you really have, through the storytelling, an audience to a lecture, where that lecturer sees everyone wearing a hat with their ego on. Yeah. So, for example, the farmer has the hat with the sheep and the whatever on, and the teacher has the hat with its blackboard and students and whatever. So it goes two ways, really. One is to make sure that people leave their worries outside the door, but you can also use this little story to make sure that people leave their sort of roles outside the door. Yeah. If you have a very, very, very tough environment, you can even go into exploring, what your role is made up of, so that you realize that you are you, whatever role you have. But that's for another conversation, I think. That'll take us down a rabbit hole. So what I do is, first of all, acknowledge that everybody is an expert in their own area. and that we're now in an environment where everybody has to turn on their beginner's curiosity, like a little child, no, to start sort of exploring this new area together. Something that's very useful when you work with groups is also to start off by asking everyone to sort of share how they liked learning, what things they don't like learning. If there's a lot of people in that group, you can put them into little groups and they can come up with their own team name, for example. So we start cohesing the group in a different way. So we have to sort of redefine the relationships that they have. So investing in that at the beginning of a course is really important. It's the degree to which you have to sort of redefine the roles will depend on the initial status that people have anyway. In a classroom where you have different people who don't have roles as such, you know that students do have their roles as well, so they have their status as well. And we need to be able to sort of realize who is the leader in that room, who is the person who's feeling most self-conscious, who's the shy one. So by having a little bit of information about that, something that I do is at the beginning of a course or beginning of the year, I get my students to write me a letter to tell me about them. So it's not really a structured letter. It's a letter where they tell me about themselves. And if there is anything they want me to know about the way they like learning or they don't like learning. And this is an eye-opener, because I've had students, for example, say, please, please, please do not make me read aloud in class. Mm-hmm. Because I feel very, very bad about this, and people in my class tend to laugh. So by knowing that, I can manage that situation and maybe get that person to read something very simple, very short, and little by little work on that, while I'm at the same time working on the people who laugh to stop, to put them maybe into situations where they have more complicated things to do, and they realize that, that they can't go on like this. So creating a safe space. I'm not sure if I answered your question here, but there are a lot of things that you can do to sort of create this safe space. Cooperative learning actually has a lot of really great tools about creating the social learning environment, and this is something that can be used as well for managing the status.
Yes, definitely. I think it struck me as the example that you gave me, which I have actually had in my past as well. I've been in situations where I've taught business English with groups of people with that kind of status and feelings about who they are and what role they play, and it is very interesting. And I think I would have loved to have kind of reflected more upon that back then than I actually did before teaching, because it probably would have helped me a lot. So hearing this is really interesting. But I think also what you've just said about every class, in every class there'll be a status that someone will have, even in a group of teenagers, for example, what you said about the shy teenagers, the leaders, the ones, they'll have a type of image that they want to have with other teenagers based on all sorts of things, and they may not even be aware of it, but the others will sense it as well. And as a teacher, the more that you kind of understand that, the better that you're able to do with it. So I do really like the idea of them writing letters at the beginning of term or the beginning of year. That makes a lot of sense and is a very useful thing to do, I think.
Yes, it gives them a non-threatening way of telling you things. And also perhaps putting up a space where they can come and speak to you without the others being around. I know that this works a lot with especially boys that have a very set sort of leader role. Mm-hmm. If I give them the opportunities to say, look, I understand that you have this role, okay? But I also understand that you might have questions. And even if you don't want to be seen as not having questions, then, you can come and see me at this time where I'm going to be in the classroom or whatever. Or you can also manage it with them saying, like, remember that you are a leader. So if you ask questions, the others are going to follow and ask questions too. So you can empower them as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, Patricia, what about different age groups? So, we've talked a little bit about different age groups, adults, teenagers, and emotional intelligence. But how would you kind of differentiate between ages, if we talk about that more specifically, when it comes to this subject? Is there a way that you would, or the specific activities that you would do with some students and not others, etc., or approaches?
Yeah. Obviously, the younger, if we know a little bit about cognitive development, we'll know that younger learners, they're more here and now anyway, and they're not very good with abstract thinking. So we need to tailor, obviously, the type of activities that we do with them to the age group. Now, it has been proven actually in many schools that if you start having emotional intelligence, socio-emotional learning and mindfulness from early years, you can really build this up. Something that's really easy to do with younger children is to have them realize that things go on in their body. So, for example, you can have them get a toy, put that on their chest or on their stomach, and see what happens to the toy when they're breathing. And what they're doing really is that they're following their in-breath and out-breath, but in a more tangible way. So that, if you say to a little child, where is your breath going? They'll probably go, huh? What? My breath? What's it? But by doing it, by making it a little bit more tangible and have them maybe have their favorite dinosaur sitting on their chest or on the stomach and going up and then go, oh, miss, it's moving, it's going up and down. And, oh, let's follow it. Let's see what happens to it when we breathe in. Let's take air in and see what happens to, Dino the dinosaur. And then you can get them to connect to their breath. And as they actually calm down when they're doing that as well, it's a nice feeling for them. And often you got little children coming and saying, can we do that thing with the dinosaur again? And they come and ask about, the activity, but obviously they have no idea that they're really doing something, that they're starting to do things with breath work. Another thing as well that you can do for emotional intelligence and emotional learning that I love, and I actually use in all ages, is the internal weather report. When most kids and most people, they are aware of, like, when the sun shines, you feel one way, when it's raining, you feel another way. So you can try and sort of see, well, inside your body, what type of weather is it right now? Is it cloudy? Are you feeling a little bit sort of, gloomy? Or is it very sunny and you're really happy and whatever? So you can try and, and this is something you can sort of elaborate on as the ages go up. And you can also tie it into language learning or geography or whatever you want to tie it into as well. Because another thing that I love doing is integrating all this into, obviously, the lesson plan. So we don't have to, use a lot of time outside what we already have to do. Teachers' plates are usually really full. So, the more you can integrate things into what you're already doing, the better it's going to be. So the internal weather report is very powerful. If you think about it, right, if you first of all maybe get your students to sit down still or lie down, and then just see where in your body do you think it's sunny?
That's interesting.
Where do you think it's raining right now? And stuff like that. So you can get them to be more aware of how they're feeling, but in a very tangible way as well. And then you can go on to as well help them regulate their emotions through this weather report. Like, for example, when you see somebody who's like really angry, saying, "Ooh, I can see that there's a storm coming in right now. Would you like to sit down maybe and wait for it to pass?" Instead of saying, "Stop being angry." That wouldn't probably have the right reaction for the child. So you can use it to regulate your students, even if they're really tiny. And they really do take well to this, because, of course, mindfulness is all about having a beginner's mind. And kids already have that, so that's brilliant. They've got curiosity. They're usually non-judgmental, and they go about exploring things. So, they're the perfect mindfulness people. And then if you get into a bit of conscious emotional regulation as well, so you can help them realize, how they're feeling, and what happens when you're feeling. One thing that I love that's tied in with the weather report is that, even if it's cloudy, the sun is actually there. Even if it's really cloudy and rainy, the sky is always there. So you can get them to little by little realize that, this too will pass. There is actually a blue sky behind all this gray and all this rain and all this storm and all these things that, it won't last forever. And that helps them with something that's really vital in emotional intelligence, which is realizing that we're not going to be stuck in this state forever. However bad you're feeling right now, there will be a movement somewhere. You will be able to get out of it in one way or the other. There will be a tomorrow. Yeah. So that's probably one of the most powerful things in emotional intelligence and in mindfulness that can keep you on track and make your brain realize that you're not stuck. You can, there is a tomorrow.
That's really useful, I think. This idea of, okay, you may be feeling bad about things at the moment, but this is temporary. It won't always be the case. And having people reflect upon that, especially kids or teenagers, for example, about their situation, and the idea of visualizing it with weather, having, there are clouds, but behind the clouds, there's a sun and a blue sky, and it'll come out soon. If not today, then tomorrow, I think is really useful. Related to that, Patricia, what about, I was thinking before, I don't know what made me think about it, but the idea of role playing, can that play a part in developing emotional intelligence, you think, in the classroom?
Yes, of course. I mean, you can definitely use role playing to use scenarios to practice empathy and conflict resolution, and also to use, to allow students to understand others' perspectives. I think role playing is a very powerful tool. You do need to know what you're role playing, though, and what is the aim of that role play. So I think for me, it's very useful for, in particular, conflict resolution. You can sort of role play a situation of resolving a conflict in different ways, and how that conflict could be resolved by having more or less emotional intelligence, or by being more aware of other people's perspectives. So that's very powerful in that way. I also think that role play is useful for providing new perspectives, because obviously we tend to live in our own little world, and we don't realize maybe that other people perceive things in a different way. So I think role play is definitely something that you can use for a lot of things, but always with a clear aim and clear instructions, because role play is one of these things that can quite easily get out of hand otherwise, because kids will mess about or whatever. So if role play is powerful, but always with a clear aim and clear instructions of what we're doing with this role play. And perhaps I would add a little debriefing afterwards on how did you feel in this situation? How did you feel in this other situation? What was the difference? So not just do the role play and let it go. Actually, this is true for everything. Like you need to sort of debrief a little bit, so we can reflect on what's going on. Reflection is very important for everything we do, really. If we don't reflect on what goes on, your brain just thinks it wasn't important and it'll just let it go. So having the post-reflection after a role play can actually be the most important part of that role play situation.
Yes, I was thinking about, to go back to it again, that situation where you have the people in the hotel together. Be kind of interesting to, this is what I was thinking. Perhaps you could tell me if you agree with me or not. Where you have a boss and other staff, to actually have them take on the roles of each other at some point. Would that help with their kind of reimagining their status or being more empathetic, do you think, or might that backfire?
I think it depends on what you're teaching, really. If it's, for example, a course in leadership, or it's a course about well-being, or something that has to do with all of them in not necessarily learning a new language, or learning something specific to their job, then obviously there it could be very useful. If, for example, you're working on group dynamics in an organization to make them more effective, to make sure that the teamwork works better and the communication works better, then by all means, I think it could be very empowering to have people take on somebody else's role. However, if it's like a situation where you're learning perhaps a language, let's say, putting people into different roles might have a more limited
value
goal there, really. But I think it all depends on what you're doing and how you perceive the climate to be. If you think that there is a really tough nut to crack there, maybe it could be very useful for that person to take on but there I would do it more in an indirect way. So maybe have a dialogue between, let's say that we're working on a language, and have a dialogue between a client and a housekeeper, for example. And then maybe put the manager in the housekeeper's position and put the housekeeper in the client's position. So that would be an indirect way to work with it. I don't know if it would be very useful to have them like consciously take on different power relations, but it could be useful in dialogues like that.
It might help them be more empathetic to each other if that is something that you want to work with in the group, perhaps.
Absolutely. If you see that that's something that could come in handy, then definitely. I'm all for, I think everything has a space at the right time, So I don't think, like, oh, now we're going into new methodologies, we scrap all the no. If you see that, this could be useful and it could be helpful for the learning situation. But as I said before, as long as we know what we're doing with it, where are we going with this situation? What are we working on? It's a bit like when you have, if you're working on content, then focus on the content, not on maybe the spelling. And if you're working on spelling, focus on the spelling and maybe not the content, type thing. That depending on the aim of the course, of the activity, of the lesson, of that moment, then yes, I think it could be useful. But we'd have to sort of reflect on how useful that would be in that situation. If it's for team building, definitely that would be a useful situation.
Yeah. I remember role playing with a group of teachers before a parents' evening, taking on the role of the teacher giving out bad news or dealing with a difficult parent or a difficult student, where the parent is supporting the student. So giving out these roles and situations and getting the other teachers to role play the difficult student or role play the parent, and having the teacher play the part of a teacher having to give the news that the student isn't behaving well or hasn't got good marks, etc., and that being a very interesting thing to do with teachers.
Absolutely. I think teacher training, definitely role play has a place, big time. And having teachers maybe, or new teachers as well, in different situations, role playing what they would do in different situations. I think that would be probably very powerful. That's definitely a good use of role play, in my opinion. So yes, I agree entirely with you. That's a really interesting one to do, actually. The one with the parent teacher situation. I'll make a note of that one.
Yeah. It was something that I don't know who suggested it in our school, but it was a really valuable thing to do. I was asked to facilitate it, and I really I think the teachers who participated in it really got a lot out of it, because they were, for example, in the parents' evening, they weren't that frequent. They were once a term, and there were situations that typically came up that teachers had to deal with, and it was much better for teachers to be given those situations and to actually be able to act out how they would respond, and then, as you say, after the role play, to talk about it together how they responded, and maybe the things that they did in the heat of the moment, because the teacher who's playing the role of the teacher did not know until it happened how the parent and how the child, the teachers playing them, were going to react. So it led to some very interesting discussions.
Yeah, I bet. I love it. Listening to you right now, actually, it just popped into my head that something that you could do that's similar to that actually with students is probably doing something like emotions charades. You can play charades with it, with students acting out emotions, using facial expressions and gestures and things as well, and putting them into different emotions to make them more aware of it. So yeah, and I think talking about things like this and different experiences that we all have is so enriching. Yeah, it's so enriching.
Yeah.
So that's something as well that I think that helps your emotional intelligence a great deal as a teacher, or as anyone really, is to talk to colleagues and collaborate with colleagues and see what they're doing as well, to see what you can incorporate and what they can maybe take from your side as well. So
Yeah. And what you said, I think this the role of teacher development, teacher training when it comes to emotional intelligence. How do you see that? Is it important to have those sessions where teachers are come together and you talk about this, or you give teachers who may be unfamiliar with the techniques we've been talking about or the subject opportunities to do this? Is that something you think is very important to do?
absolutely. I think it is probably the most important aspect, because not only do we need to talk about this to validate what we think, but also to realize that there are things that you can do about it. So I think teacher training courses, in fact, lack a lot of the very vital aspects that you need in real teaching, in practical teaching. There's a lot of things on how to teach a certain subject, etc. There isn't that much on classroom management. Quite a few teachers hit the reality the first time they go into a classroom and realize that the textbook and the reality are quite different things.
Yeah.
So I think emotional intelligence and emotional management, and having this incorporated into teacher training would be vital, really, and even more so now, where we've come out of the COVID situation. There's a lot more anxiety. We have lots of changes. I mean, like before, there used to be like one generation between parents and their children. Now with technology, there's more than one generation in between them when it comes to the way they see the world. You can see that in how teenagers have a different concept of certain things that maybe when we were teenagers we had a completely different concept about. So having the possibility to include a way to learn strategies, tools, and learn about the awareness about how the brain works, how emotions work, why are they there, how do we react, what can we do in these situations, and how can we actually build our own emotional toolbox, would be very, very important to incorporate. I'm very happy to see that there's a lot more focus on well-being now in a lot of things that have to do with schools. Now we only need the schools as well to, jump onto that train and realize that if you do incorporate a focus on emotional intelligence, maybe things like mindfulness, yoga, whatever, something that helps you regulate, and well-being in general, and finding out without being scared of the answers, finding out what is affecting people's well-being, then I think we have the key to a much more learning enhanced and much more effective learning environment in the future.
Definitely. So bringing things to a close, Patricia, is there anything we haven't talked about that you thought or you think is useful for teachers to know about related to mindfulness, emotional intelligence, etc.?
How many hours do we have? I think this area of emotional intelligence and of mindfulness and of regulating emotions and all these things, we could probably talk for weeks on end about this because there's so much going into it. As we don't have that amount of time, I hope that we've sort of planted a little seed of curiosity. And what I do think would be very useful is that, teachers jump onto the self-awareness train of like trying to figure out a little bit more about how you react, how you feel, and what you say. Communication is another area that perhaps we could have gone into a little bit more, because obviously the way we communicate and the way that we translate what other people say to us into our own emotions is something that's a great area to explore as well, because obviously misunderstandings happen a lot, and nowadays when we've got a lot of texting rather than face-to-face communication, we're missing the non-verbal cues, and that's something that has a lot to do with your emotional well-being as well. So perhaps communication and non-verbal communication is an area that is also very important that we probably haven't touched on enough today.
So just briefly then, Patricia, if I may ask you about how can you kind of make up for the lack of non-verbal cues if someone is either connecting with others, be it other teachers or students online or through these text chat applications, etc. Are there ways in which you can kind of make up for it?
I think we're going into a really complicated area here because, again, we've got like it would be ideal if everybody was on the same page for this. But of course, teenagers have a tendency of giving emoticons, for example, emojis, a different meaning. So, for example, where you and I perhaps see an okay sign, they see something else. So we'll probably need to first of all establish, what do we mean by these things? So we are on the same page. That could be the start of having better communication. Of course, the people that you do talk to, maybe establish, okay, when I'm feeling this way, I'm going to do this. When I'm feeling this way, I'm going to do that. If I want you to reply immediately, I'm going to say this. So I think we do need to become much more sort of specific in our communication when there aren't any nonverbal cues. So, and this obviously is it's the opposite of what's happening, because texting obviously becomes shorter and shorter. I think it is a really complicated area. But if we start off by defining concepts a bit, I know this sounds a little bit complicated, but it will probably be the only way, because otherwise we are prone to get into misunderstandings. Obviously, we've got the emojis, we've got the little avatar things that are getting more and more real life-like. So maybe, making use of these. But if you have some person who you sort of have to have non-face-to-face communication with often, maybe establish, a little code of conduct with that person to make sure that we can maybe avoid misunderstandings. I think, my generation has a tendency of saying, okay, this is getting really complicated, let's call each other. So we can talk about it instead, rather than text. But yeah, I think it is a really complicated area, because obviously non-verbal communication is actually much more important than the verbal one. So we're in, we're coming into an era that's going to be very interesting when it comes to seeing how this affects people.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
Hey education changemakers, ready for something special? It's Bet Show's 40th anniversary and we're throwing a free celebration just for you. Join us at London Excel from January 22nd to 24th to connect, learn and be inspired. Picture this, 300 plus speakers who truly get it, 600 cutting edge edtech companies and all the fresh ideas you need to make 2025 your best year yet. So why wait? Head to uk.betshow.com, grab your free ticket and come celebrate with your peers. Because this is for you. See you at Bet.
I've just thought of an example which I'd love to hear what you think about, but for using messenger apps such as WhatsApp, for example, Telegram, there's largely two types of people. I'm going to generalize here, but there are people who, like myself, like the idea of using these apps for short, to the point messages, so I can ask people information about. I wouldn't use them if I was trying to put over something a bit more complicated. It would need a meeting, even if it's online, if I can't meet face to face. But there are other people who, rather than type text, like to leave very long, meandering voicemail messages, which I've had to deal with situations where, I've had to tell people kindly that, I can read a text while I'm in another meeting or while I'm doing something else, but I can't always listen to a kind of 4-minute message when perhaps one sentence of text would have been enough to say what they wanted to say. That's kind of a difficult thing to kind of to let people know about, but I think it's important, isn't it, to kind of establish how you feel about certain types of communication when it's online or mediated by this text chat, etc. Don't know what you think about that.
I hear you. You should have seen me right now. I was sitting here chuckling away. It was definitely, yes, absolutely. I think I'm very much like you here. In the school I work right now, at the British school, the Wi-Fi in the school doesn't allow for voice messages. So
Right.
that's a really good way of telling people, look, I can't actually hear your messages. So, could you please text? So that sort of takes away the pressure from yourself having to tell people, look, whatever. What I think is the best thing there, and I have a feeling you might agree with me there, is just to tell people that, look, I'm not able to listen to your messages, so it's a shame that I'm going to miss what you're saying there. So could you just jot it down, instead in a text message?
Yeah, that's definitely what I've done. I've kind of said, look, I'm in a meeting. I can't listen to the message at the moment. So if it's important, can you write it as a text?
Exactly. That's what I do as well. And I think that's the only way. But yes, I agree entirely that it is important for everybody to let the other people know what your stance on communicate on, like, the messaging is, because it does change. And also I've seen this a lot when I've at one point I was a mediator in one of the schools I worked in, and we had mediations even between children and their parents at some points. And it's quite interesting because, of course, the view a child who's grown up in this digital world has of texting and of messaging is completely different to what their parents have, depending on the parents' age, of course. But, it is different, even if they're young parents. So it's very important that sometimes you give, you have this space of saying, look, this is what I understand of this. I don't like it when I've written you this text and you reply with, okay. And you're like, what do you mean, okay? So it's very frustrating sometimes, no, for some people who do text a lot, and then they get like a really short answer back. So I agree with you. I think we need to establish, what our expectations perhaps are, or what we like or what we don't like. It's a bit like the leaving someone seen situation, no, in the WhatsApp, or in other messages. It's like, I can't just answer immediately when I get a text. So I have to tell people sometimes, look, don't take it personally if I don't
Yeah,
answer directly, because I can't just sit down and message you back when I'm in the middle of a lesson or in a meeting.
Or perhaps you need to think about your reply.
Exactly. Which is something that I think today's society is losing a lot.
Yeah. People are because they can receive instant replies. A lot of people expect to receive them, which is not always the case. That they should expect that, I think.
I agree. And you see this in classrooms as well, with the patience is something that's gone out the window completely. You've got the student coming in the morning saying, what are we going to do this afternoon in like the last lesson of the day? And you're like, hello? We're going to do registration now.
Yeah. Patricia, I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing so generously all of your knowledge and experience related to mindfulness and emotional intelligence and other things. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I think you're right. I think we could have gone on and talked a lot more about this, but our time is up. So thank you very, very much for everything today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've absolutely loved it.
Happy to hear
back,
that.
Here I am.
Definitely. I'll definitely invite you back at some point. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So, everybody, that brings us to the end of today's Sunday Lunch Show. Many thanks to Patricia for sharing experience and knowledge about emotional intelligence, and to all of you who joined us today, to both live and to those people who are listening back to the recording. And that is it from me for today. There are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of interesting topics, so please listening in live or to the recordings, and I hope you will join me again next week at the same time. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.